We're here at Acer for CES 2026 to see their latest gaming monitors. Now there's 3 products that they're announcing at the show, and all 3 of them are pretty interesting. We have got a 1440p 500Hz monitor, which also has a 1000Hz dual mode. Never seen that panel before, so we're getting a little sneak peek to see what that's going to be like. New QD-OLED panel as well, new 5K panel for gaming as well. So let's go check out those monitors after this word from our CES sponsors. Thanks to MSI for sponsoring our CES coverage. Check out MSI's range of Z890 and B860 motherboards built for performance with robust VRM designs that are cooled by massive heatsinks. There's more than enough power delivery to fully support the latest Core Ultra desktop processors from Intel. Also enjoy ultra-fast networking, Wi-Fi 7 and at least 5 gigabit wired LAN. There's also support for PCIe Gen 5 along with MSI's screwless M.2 Shield Frozer for quick and easy installation of storage. Learn more about MSI's range of Z890 and B860 motherboards via the links in the description.
Also supporting our CES coverage is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryo Sheet, an excellent alternative to thermal pastes, and because they don't use any liquid, they can never dry out. These graphene thermal pads offer very high thermal conductivity, are easy to use, are extremely durable, and can be used to maximize your CPU and/or GPU's cooling performance. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. We'd also like to thank Endorphy, creators of the award-winning Fluctus fans, available in both 120 and 140 millimeters. These high-performance fans are designed to move air efficiently in dense spaces with focused airflow and reduced noise. Perfect for CPU, power supplies, PC cases, and more. So to learn more, please click the links in the video description.
So here we've got a very interesting product using a panel that I haven't seen before. This is the Acer Predator XB273U F6. So I have to read that off the card when we ever see these monitors for the first time. But anyway, this is a 27-inch IPS panel at 2560 by 1440, so 1440p, but it comes with the highest refresh rate that I've seen for that panel format, 500 Hz in its QHD mode, and it also comes with a DFR setting. So that's dual frame rate, and that will take you down to 720p, but at 1000 Hz. So it is listed here as HD, not full HD, so that does mean 720p. But yeah, we're getting a 500 Hz 1440p and 1000 Hz 720p mode. The first time that we've seen 1000 Hz in a monitor like this. Actually, well, at least as far as I'm concerned, beating OLEDs to the market for that. Maybe we'll see some OLEDs with that spec at CES as well. But yeah, first time in an LCD panel. There's a few other interesting things about this monitor. It comes with a native 2000:1 contrast ratio. So usually with IPS LCDs, 1000:1 is standard, but this one is 2000:1 native, and that's not with dimming technology or anything, because they do also list here on the spec sheet a 100,000,000:1 with the automatic contrast stuff. I don't believe this is an HDR monitor in any sort of normal sense. Don't believe there's any local dimming technology here. They list 350 nits of brightness. It's also got 95% DCI-P3 coverage, so it should be a sort of standard wide gamut monitor. So in the OSD settings, you've got the pretty simple toggle between those 2 frame rate modes. Works quite well, the usual delay between the 2, but I'm expecting it to work like a lot of other dual frame rate monitors where you basically get all the same configuration options. It doesn't really change too much apart from that resolution and refresh rate. So I did play around a little bit on this test setup with things like the UFO test, for example, which worked okay at 500 Hz in the 1440p mode, but didn't really work at all in the 1000 Hz mode. Microsoft Edge and obviously the setup that they've got here meant that the UFO test just never reached 1000 Hz, so we couldn't really get a good look at how the motion clarity of that mode is going to work. But as far as the 1440p mode is concerned, I wouldn't say it's the clearest implementation, at least with the overdrive settings and how the monitor is currently being presented. So I'd be hoping at some point that maybe those things are tuned up a little bit. There is a little bit of blurring and ghosting in that setting as opposed to what you'd see on an OLED, but 500 Hz for the first time is certainly interesting from that sort of standpoint. Okay, so I've been told that this monitor will be priced at $800 US and will be available in the second quarter of this year, so it shouldn't be too far until you'll be able to get 1000 Hz 720p monitors for gaming. Now, with that pricing, it is quite interesting because there's no real HDR capabilities in this panel, no HDR hardware, local dimming or that sort of thing. So it is probably on the expensive side for an LCD 1440p panel, because usually what we were seeing for, I think we saw a gigabyte monitor earlier in the year, 320 Hz 1440p, that was about $300 US. And then obviously there's been high performance monitors that have been around this sort of price as well. I think the Asus PG27AQN back in the day, a couple of years ago, debuted around $1,000 US. So it's not a crazy price, but it certainly is on the higher end of 1440p monitor prices. So if you were interested in just your standard, 180 hertz or 240 hertz or even 360 hertz these days, you'd be expected to pay quite a bit less than this monitor. But because it's a unique capability, 500 hertz, we haven't seen that before. We haven't seen 1000 hertz before on LCD either. It is also trying to compete with those 1080p esports monitors that do 540 hertz, 750 hertz that we saw at CES last year, those sorts of refresh rates. So with that price now, kind of straddle those two different things. It'll be interesting to see how competitive it is overall, whether things like the 500 hertz mode makes it worth it. It does, whether it gives you a clarity advantage over other monitors that are more in that 360 hertz range. But it's certainly not a ludicrous price, I would say. So yeah, we'll have to review it, test it later on, and see how it comes from a competitive standpoint. Oh, the other thing, of course, this being 720p in the 1000 hertz mode. The resolution, again, not amazing, like we sort of saw with the 720 hertz OLEDs earlier this year. Well, actually, it was last year now, we're in 2026 now. It's okay. It's going to be okay for esports games. It will depend on the UI elements in the games that you're playing. I think when we tested CS2 with that OLED panel, a couple of the UI elements were a little hard to see just because of the resolution. So I feel like 720p is quite a step down from 1440p, but that's the only way that you're achieving 1000 hertz on this sort of panel. So we'll see how that goes when we get to testing it and how competitive it is with some of the OLED panels that we're expecting to come out with this sort of spec soon as well. So let's move on to another monitor. The next monitor we're looking at here is the Predator X34 F3, much shorter name than the previous monitor, so a bit easier to remember. Now, this is a 3440 by 1440 QD-OLED ultrawide using the new 360 Hz panel from Samsung Display. So you would have seen some testing of this panel already on Monitors Unboxed, where we looked at the Asus and the MSI versions. So we're expecting this to be basically the same setup in terms of its panel and performance. So 360 Hz refresh rate, the new V-stripe, or as I would call it, RGB stripe subpixel layout. We get the improved screen coding, which is a little bit blacker in high ambient light environments, kind of like this showroom floor here, so it looks pretty good. Still the glossy experience, of course. There's quoting things like 99% DCI-P3, but we've already tested this panel, so you can go and see all the specifications of that for yourself. So I don't see anything in this. I've got a spec sheet here that I'm sort of looking at. I'm not seeing anything that's particularly unique to this monitor that would make it, like a cool feature or extra performance that we would have seen compared to those Asus and MSI models. I am being told that this panel will be about $1,200 US when it launches in the second quarter of this year. So I think we learned from MSI that their version is about $1,100 US, so this is slightly more expensive, but you never know what the actual retail price of these models will be when it comes to it, but Asus is telling me $1,200 for this model. So it's going to be another alternative for people that do want the new 360 Hz panel. I think this is a really excellent QD-OLED advancement, a big step forward in terms of its performance, capabilities, features. So this should be a really attractive option for people that want one of those premium ultra-wide monitors. So yeah, keen to see another option, but there's one more monitor that we want to check out here from Asus. Let's go do that. The third gaming monitor that Asus are announcing at CES is the NITRO XV270X P. So I don't know whether this is a new name for this monitor, but we have seen something pretty similar to this at Computex last year. It is using the new 5K 27-inch IPS LCD panel. So it's 5K at 165 Hz, so 5120 by 2880. So that's one of the highest resolution gaming monitors at a suitable gaming sort of refresh rate that we've seen. We have seen, of course, 5K panels at things like 60 Hz. I think they're up to 120 Hz now, potentially for your productivity-focused monitors, but at 165 Hz, this will be quite good for gaming. It also comes with the 330 Hz dual mode functionality, so that drops it down to 1440p, which is quite a nice combination. 5K in the flagship mode and then 1440p in the 330 Hz mode does make a lot of sense. Earlier you would have seen that 1080p monitor, well, the 1440p monitor with the 720p dual mode. Bit of a resolution drop, but 27-inch 1440p on this does look quite a lot better. It's going to be much more suitable for people that want to maybe use the 5K mode for desktop productivity work and a bit of high performance gaming in your maybe single player titles, and then 330 Hz 1440p for multiplayer games is going to be a great combination, I think. Now, we have confirmed with Acer that it does use a glossy screen coating. This is not the protective film or anything. Final version will be glossy like this, which I think looks quite nice in this showroom environment that we're seeing here. It's not too reflective, it's quite bright, and obviously the 5K resolution as well. It's very crisp and sharp. Now, it's not side by side next to a 4K monitor, but I have seen a lot of 4K monitors, and I'd say this probably looks a little better than that. But I think for us, Monitors Unboxed, we make a lot of videos. We're doing video editing in applications like Premiere. 5K is a better resolution for those workflows, those applications than you would see from 4K. That's because you can have, for example, like a 4K window that you're working on. You can see your video in native resolution, but still have space around the edges for the rest of the UI and to run a bit of, you can have extra things on the monitor while seeing your project in its full resolution. So I think 5K is going to be quite an attractive option for people from that sense. Obviously, the performance requirements from games is going to be quite high, so this may not be the option for people with mid-range hardware, certainly a premium display. Now, I'm told from Acer that this will cost $800 US when it launches in the second quarter of this year. So I think, again, that's a pretty good price. There's no real HDR hardware in this monitor as far as I'm seeing from the spec sheet. They're sort of listing up to a peak of 400 nits in the HDR mode, 350 nits in the SDR mode. So that tells me there's probably no HDR local dimming or those sorts of things available in this panel. We're also getting, well, they actually haven't quoted a contrast spec in this spec sheet either. 8-bit panel, that sort of thing, HDMI, DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, so no DisplayPort 2.1 on this monitor. But yeah, so I think with 4K monitors these days, we're seeing for your sort of high performance models, the M27 UP was about $380 for parts of the year. So it's going to cost you about double to get a 5K monitor as opposed to the 4K mode with dual mode that we saw from Gigabyte, which is going to be, again, an expensive sort of premium display. But it is meant for a certain crowd of people that do want that productivity advantage as well as the gaming performance. So yeah, again, new panel. We've seen this at Computex before. It's been in the works for a while now, but we are expecting this year. So you should be able to buy this quite soon. All right, and that does it for Acer's gaming monitor announcements at CES. A couple of really cool things on show here, especially that 1440p 500Hz monitor. I'm very keen to test that out later in the year, see how things like response time testing go, UFO testing, all sorts of motion components to see whether an IPS LCD can really achieve 500Hz and even 1000Hz, so whether it's more of a sort of marketing thing. So we'll check that out a little bit later. For now, that's it though. Thanks to our sponsors for bringing us out to CES, MSI, Thermal Grizzly, and Endorphi. Catch more Monitors Unboxed content in the coming days. We're checking out plenty of brands here at the show. That's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.